Cabinet of Donald Trump. This article lists the members of President Donald Trump's cabinet. Trump assumed office on January 20, 2017, and the president has the authority to nominate members of his cabinet to the United States Senate for confirmation under Appointments Clause of the United States Constitution. Before confirmation and during congressional hearings, a high-level career member of an executive department heads this pre-confirmed cabinet on an acting basis. The cabinet's creation is part of the transition of power following the 2016 United States presidential election. This page documents the confirmation process for any successful or unsuccessful cabinet nominees of Donald Trump's administration. They are listed in order of creation of the cabinet position, also used as the basis for the United States presidential line of succession. Contents: Announced nominees Cabinet of President Donald J. Trump. Individual elected into office, and does not serve at the pleasure of the President. All other appointed cabinet members do. Individual officially confirmed by the Senate. Individual serving in an acting capacity. Individual serving in an acting capacity, nominated to fill position full-time. Individual took office with no Senate consent needed. Cabinet members. Bernhard served as acting secretary from January 2, 2019 to April 11, 2019. Officially Mulvaney carries the title of Acting White House Chief of Staff, but since the position does not require confirmation by the U.S. Senate, the title acting does not impact the authority of the position. Haspel served as acting director from April 26, 2018 to May 21, 2018. Wheeler served as acting administrator from July 9, 2018 to February 28, 2019. Analysis: Due to Trump's lack of government or military experience and his political positions, much interest was expressed in the media over his cabinet nominations, as they were believed to show how he intended to govern. Trump's proposed cabinet was characterized by the media as being very conservative. It was described as a conservative dream team by Politico, the most conservative cabinet in United States history by, and one of the most consistently conservative domestic policy teams in modern history by the. Described Trump's potential cabinet as an unorthodox team, popular with conservatives, that more establishment Republicans such as John McCain or Mitt Romney likely would not have chosen. CNN agreed, calling the proposed cabinet a conservative dream team of domestic cabinet appointments. On the other hand, stated that it's nearly impossible to identify a clear ideological bent in the incoming president's cabinet nominations. The Wall Street Journal also stated that Trump's nominations signaled a pro-deregulation administration policy. Several of his cabinet nominees politically opposed the federal departments they were selected to lead. In terms of total personal wealth, Trump's cabinet is the wealthiest in modern American history. The cabinet is largely made up of nominees who have business experience but minimal experience in the government when compared to the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush and Barack Obama. The Pew Research Center also noted that Trump's cabinet is one of the most business-heavy in American history. A third of the department heads in the Trump administration, 33%, will be people whose prior experience has been entirely in the public sector. Only 3 other U.S. presidents are in the same range: William McKinley, 3 out of 8 cabinet positions, or 37.5%, Ronald Reagan, 4 out of 13 positions, or 31%, and Dwight Eisenhower, 3 out of 10 positions, or 30%. There are no economists in President Trump's cabinet. There are also significantly fewer lawyers in Trump's cabinet compared to previous presidents' cabinets. Confirmation delays. Despite being nominated promptly during the transition period, most cabinet members were unable to take office on Inauguration Day because of delays in the formal confirmation process. By February 8, 2017, President Trump had fewer cabinet nominees confirmed than any prior president 2 weeks into his mandate, except George Washington. Part of the lateness was ascribed to opposition by Senate Democrats and part to delays in submitting background check paperwork. The last cabinet member, Robert Lighthizer, took office as U.S. Trade Representative on May 11, 2017, more than 4 months after his nomination. History: Choosing members of the presidential cabinet, and other high-level positions, is a complicated process, which begins before the November 2016 general election results are known. In the case of the Trump 2016 campaign, his former rival for the Republican nomination Chris Christie was appointed to lead the transition team in May 2016, shortly after Ted Cruz and John Kasich suspended their campaigns, thus making Trump the presumptive nominee of the party. In addition to various other responsibilities, the transition team is responsible for making preliminary lists of potential executive branch appointees, at least for the several dozen high-level positions if not for the several thousand lower-level positions, and doing some early vetting work on those people. The transition team also hires policy experts, over 100 in the case of the Trump transition team by October 2016, using primarily federal funds and federal office space, to help plan how the hypothetical at the time future Trump administration will implement their policy goals via the various federal agencies and departments. After the election in November 2016, when the ticket formed by Trump and Pence defeated the Clinton and Kaine ticket as well as various third-party opponents, the transition team was quickly reshuffled and expanded. Mike Pence was given the lead role, over Chris Christie, and several additional top-level transition personnel were added to the transition effort, most of them from the now-finished campaign effort. During the remainder of 2016, the team continued finding and vetting potential nominees for the various positions, as the Electoral College process was ongoing, including recounts in some states where the winning margin was relatively tiny, and before the presidential inauguration in January 2017. President-elect Trump announced his first post-election cabinet nominee, Jeff Sessions, for the role of United States Attorney General, on November 18, 2016. Trump had earlier announced Mike Pence as his pick for vice presidential running mate in July 2016, which was shortly thereafter confirmed by the delegates to the Republican National Convention when they officially nominated first Trump and then Pence. Although most positions were simultaneously under consideration by the transition team, the official announcement of offers, and the public acceptance of the offers, usually happens gradually as slots are filled, Richard Nixon being the exception. Week weighted. Average notes 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 1 2 7 2 6.8 weeks. New roles, energy in 1977, education in 1979. 2 2 1 3 5 1 5.3 weeks. New role, VA in 1989. The four earliest nominees were continuations of the Reagan cabinet. 4647.0 weeks. 1587.5 weeks. New role, DHS in 2003. Announcements of appointees were delayed by the Florida recount. 142445.4 weeks. Slightly differing figures are given in some sources. For purposes of historical comparison, this chart only includes cabinet roles, and not the cabinet-level positions. However, note that the number of cabinet positions has varied from administration to administration. Under Nixon there were 12 such roles in 1968, whereas under Trump in 2016 there are 15. Formation. After Election Day, media outlets reported on persons described by various sources as possible appointments to senior positions in the incoming Trump presidency. The number of people which have received media attention as potential cabinet appointees is higher than in most previous presidential elections, partly because the Trump 16 campaign staff, and associated PACs, was significantly smaller and less expensive, thus there are not as many people already expected to receive specific roles in the upcoming Trump administration. In particular, Trump had a smaller policy brain trust policy group than a new president normally carries, because as an anti-establishment candidate who began his campaign by largely self-funding his way to the Republican Party nomination, unlike most previous presidential winners, Trump does not have the traditional cadre of Washington insiders and donors to build out his cabinet. An additional factor that tends to make the field of potential nominees especially broad, is that unlike most presidential transition teams who select politicians as their appointees, the Trump transition team has started with a mandate to hire from the private sector as opposed to the governmental sector whenever possible. Vice President. There were dozens of potential running mates for Trump who received media speculation, including several from New York where Trump himself resides. Trump's eventual pick of Governor Mike Pence of Indiana was officially announced on July 16, 2016, and confirmed by acclamation via parliamentary procedure amongst delegates to the 2016 Republican National Convention on July 19, 2016. Cabinet. The following cabinet positions are listed in order of their creation, also used as the basis for the United States presidential line of succession. Secretary of State. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Foreign Relations Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Rex Tillerson. On December 12, 2016, Rex Tillerson, CEO of ExxonMobil, was officially selected to be the Secretary of State. Tillerson was first recommended to Trump for the Secretary of State role by Condoleezza Rice, during her meeting with Trump in late November. Rice's recommendation of Tillerson to Trump was backed up by Robert Gates 3 days later. Tillerson's confirmation hearing with the Foreign Relations Committee was held on January 11, 2017. During the hearing, Tillerson voiced support for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and opposed a Muslim immigration ban that has been proposed by Donald Trump in the past. Tillerson was approved by the Foreign Relations Committee on January 23, 2017, by a vote of 11-10. On Wednesday, February 1, Tillerson was confirmed by the Senate 56-43. Before Tillerson's confirmation, Tom Shannon was the acting secretary. Mike Pompeo. On March 13, 2018, Trump dismissed Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State, and announced his nomination of CIA Director Mike Pompeo to the office. Pompeo was confirmed by the Senate on April 26 in a 57-42 vote and was sworn in later that day. Before Pompeo's confirmation, John J. Sullivan was acting Secretary of State. Secretary of the Treasury. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Finance Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Steve Mnuchin. Trump announced the selection of investment banker Steve Mnuchin as Secretary of the Treasury on November 30, 2016. The New York Times noted that Mnuchin's selection was surprising, since Trump had attacked the banking industry and Goldman Sachs during the campaign. Mnuchin is the third Goldman alumnus to serve as Treasury Secretary. During his confirmation hearing before the Senate Finance Committee on January 19, 2017, Mnuchin was criticized by Democrats due to the foreclosure practices at his company One West. Mnuchin also failed to disclose, in required disclosure documents, $95 million of real estate that he owned, and his role as director of Dune Capital International, an investment fund in a tax haven. Mnuchin described the omissions as mistakes made amid a mountain of bureaucracy. Democrats of the Finance Committee boycotted the vote of Mnuchin and many other nominees in response to Trump's controversial immigration executive order. On February 1, 2017, Republicans suspended committee rules to send the nomination to the Senate floor on a vote of 11-0. Mnuchin was confirmed by the full Senate 53-47 on February 13, 2017. The vote fell along party lines with exception of Senator Joe Manchin as the sole Democratic vote for Mnuchin. Adam Subin served as acting secretary before Mnuchin's confirmation. Secretary of Defense. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Armed Services Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Jim Mattis. Trump informally announced the selection of General Jim Mattis as Secretary of Defense on December 1, 2016. The Trump transition team formally announced the selection on December 6, 2016. As with most cabinet roles, the Secretary-designate of Defense undergoes hearings before the appropriate committee of the United States Senate, followed by a confirmation vote. In the case of Mattis, there was an additional step needed as he had retired from the military 3 years ago, since Statute Section 903(a) of the NDAA demands a minimum of 7 years as a civilian for Pentagon appointees. Therefore Mattis needed a waiver to be allowed to become Secretary of Defense. During his hearing, Mattis agreed with the assessment that debt was the greatest threat to national security. He placed Russia first among the principal threats facing the United States and called Iran the primary source of turmoil for unrest in the Middle East. In contrast with Trump's campaign promises, Mattis advocated for maintaining NATO and keeping the Iran nuclear deal. He urged for a clear cybersecurity doctrine to be implemented. On January 12, 2017, the Senate Armed Services Committee voted 24-3 to grant the waiver. The full Senate voted 81-17 to pass the waiver 3 hours later. After the Trump transition team canceled a meeting between Mattis and the House Armed Services Committee, the waiver narrowly passed the committee by a vote of 34-28. The House voted 268-151 to grant the waiver. The Senate Armed Services Committee approved Mattis' confirmation on January 18, 2017, by a 26-1 margin, and sent the nomination to the full Senate for consideration. One of Donald Trump's first acts as president was the approval of Mattis' waiver to become Secretary of Defense. After being confirmed by the Senate on the evening of January 20, 2017, by a vote of 98-1, Mattis was sworn in by Vice President Pence on the same evening. On December 20, 2018, Secretary Mattis announced his intention to resign at the end of February 2019. President Trump moved the departure date up to January 1, 2019. Attorney General. The nomination of an Attorney General designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Judiciary Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Dana Boent and Sally Yates. On January 30, 2017, Trump appointed Dana Boent, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, to serve as acting Attorney General until Jeff Sessions' Senate confirmation. Boent had replaced Sally Yates, who was fired by Trump for ordering the Justice Department to not defend Trump's Executive Order 13,769, which restricted entry to the United States. Yates claimed that, at present, I am not convinced that the defense of the executive order is consistent with these responsibilities of the Department of Justice, nor am I convinced that the executive order is lawful. Boent served until the confirmation of Jeff Sessions on February 9, 2017. Jeff Sessions. Trump's selection of Senator Jeff Sessions from Alabama was officially announced on November 18, 2016. Members of the Democratic Party in the Senate had stated their intention to oppose Sessions. That said, successfully defeating the nomination of Sessions would have required peeling away the votes of at least 2 or 3 Republican members of the Senate body. Republican members of the Judiciary Committee spoke favorably towards Sessions, as Sessions had been a former member of the Judiciary Committee while serving as senator. Although Democratic Party senators, including Elizabeth Warren, criticized Sessions, at least one Democratic senator, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, stated he would vote to confirm Sessions. Historically, there has never been a sitting senator appointed to cabinet position who was denied that post during the confirmation process. The confirmation process for Trump's nominee Senator Jeff Sessions was described as strikingly contentious as Senator Mitch McConnell invoked Rule 19 to silence Senator Elizabeth Warren for the rest of the consideration of the nomination. McConnell interrupted Warren as she had read a letter by Coretta Scott King opposing Sessions' nomination to a federal judgeship, along with several statements which were made by Senator Ted Kennedy in 1986 during Senate hearings on Sessions' nomination. Afterwards, Warren live-streamed herself reading the letter, critical of Sessions, that Coretta Scott King had written to Senator Strom Thurmond in 1986. On February 8, Sessions was confirmed as United States Attorney General by a vote of 52-47. With all of the Republican senators and Democratic Senator Joe Manchin voting in favor of Sessions' confirmation and all other senators voting against Sessions' confirmation. Sessions' confirmation ended a nomination battle which was described by the New York Times as bitter and racially charged. On November 7, 2018, the day after the 2018 midterm elections, Jeff Sessions resigned as Attorney General at the President's request. Matthew Whitaker. With the resignation of Sessions on November 7, 2018, Trump appointed Sessions' Chief of Staff Matthew Whitaker to serve as acting Attorney General. Multiple legal challenges to Whitaker's appointment have been filed. William Barr. William Barr, a former U.S. Attorney General in the George W. Bush administration, was nominated to reprise his former role as the permanent replacement for Sessions. He was confirmed by the Senate in February 2019 by a 54-45 vote, and currently serves as Attorney General as of April 2019. Secretary of the Interior. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Ryan Zinke. Congressman Ryan Zinke was announced as the nominee for Secretary of the Interior on December 15, 2016. His nomination was approved by a 16-6 vote from the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee on January 31, 2017. Zinke was confirmed on March 1, 2017 by a vote of 68-31, becoming the first Navy SEAL to occupy a cabinet position. Before Zinke's confirmation, Kevin Hogrod served as the acting Secretary of the Interior. Zinke resigned as Secretary of the Interior on January 2, 2019. Deputy Secretary David Bernhard became acting Secretary of the Interior. Secretary of Agriculture. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Sonny Perdue. On January 18, 2017, Sonny Perdue, former governor of Georgia, was selected to be the Secretary of Agriculture. On April 24, 2017, Perdue was confirmed by the Senate in an 87-11 vote. Before Perdue's confirmation, the acting Secretary of Agriculture was Michael Skews. Secretary of Commerce. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Wilbur Ross. Trump's selection of CEO Wilbur Ross from Florida, formerly of New York, was officially announced on November 30, 2016. Confirmation hearings were originally scheduled for January 12, but were postponed because the Commerce Committee had not yet received the ethics agreement from the Office of Government Ethics and the Department of Commerce. On February 27, 2017, he was confirmed by the United States Senate in a 72-27 vote. He assumed office on February 28, 2017. Secretary of Labor. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Failed nomination of Andy Puzder. On December 8, 2016, Andy Puzder, CEO of CKE Restaurants, was officially selected to be the Secretary of Labor. The Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, HELP, delayed Puzder's hearing 5 times due to missing paperwork from the Office of Government Ethics. It was revealed that before the nomination, Puzder employed a housekeeper who was not authorized to work in the U.S. Puzder failed to pay employer taxes. Puzder fired the housekeeper and amended his taxes only after his nomination. Prior cabinet nominations from the Bush and Clinton administrations with undocumented housekeepers have had to withdraw their nominations. On February 8, 2017, the Office of Government Ethics submitted Puzder's ethics paperwork to Congress. It was also revealed Puzder's ex-wife Lisa Fierstein appeared in disguise on Oprah Winfrey's talk show in the 1980s. In the interview, she alleged Puzder beat her. She later recanted. Fierstein sent a letter to Congress shortly after his nomination stating, "Andy is not and was not abusive or violent." Complying with the HELP committee, the Oprah Winfrey Network produced tapes from the interview for members of the committee to view. 4 Republican senators from the HELP committee, Susan Collins, Tim Scott, Johnny Isakson, and Lisa Murkowski, expressed doubt over Puzder's nomination. On February 15, a day before his scheduled hearing, Puzder released a statement to the Associated Press officially withdrawing his nomination. Alex Acosta. On February 16, 2017, Alex Acosta, Dean of the Florida International University College of Law and former Justice Department attorney, was officially selected to be the Secretary of Labor. On April 27, 2017, Acosta was confirmed by the Senate in a 60-38 vote. Before Acosta's confirmation, the acting Secretary of Labor was Ed Hugler, Secretary of Health and Human Services. Although historically the nominee also holds meetings with the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, officially the nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the United States Senate Committee on Finance, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Tom Price. Trump's selection of Representative Tom Price from Georgia was officially announced on November 28, 2016. Price was confirmed by the Senate on February 10, 2017, in a 52-47 vote along party lines, with all Republicans voting in favor and all Democrats voting against. Before Price's confirmation, the acting Secretary of Health and Human Services was Norris Cochran. Price resigned on September 29, 2017, amid reports that he had expended more than $1 million of department funds for his own travel on private charter jets and military aircraft. Price is the shortest-serving confirmed Secretary of Health and Human Services, with a tenure of just 231 days. Trump initially designated Don J. Wright, and then later on October 10, 2017, Eric Hargan, as acting Secretary of Health and Human Services. Alex Azar. On November 13, 2017, President Trump announced via Twitter that Alex Azar was his nominee to be the next HHS Secretary to succeed acting Secretary Eric Hargan. Azar was the former Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under George W. Bush, 2005-2007, and President of Lilly USA, LLC, the largest affiliate of global biopharmaceutical leader Eli Lilly and Company from 2012 to 2017. Azar was confirmed by 53-43 vote on January 24, 2018. He took office on January 29, 2018. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Ben Carson. On December 5, 2016, President-elect Donald Trump announced that he would nominate Ben Carson to the position of Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. During confirmation hearings, Carson was held under close scrutiny for his lack of relevant experience, and because he has been one of the most hostile critics of HUD's role in enforcing anti-discrimination laws. On January 24, 2017, the Senate Banking Committee voted unanimously to approve the nomination, sending it to the Senate floor for a complete vote. On March 2, 2017, Carson was confirmed by the United States Senate in a 58-41 vote. Before Carson's nomination, Craig Clemenson served as the acting Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Secretary of Transportation. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Elaine Chao. On November 29, 2016, it was reported that President-elect Trump selected former United States Secretary of Labor Elaine Chao of Kentucky as his Secretary of Transportation. On January 31, Chao was confirmed by the Senate by a vote of 93-6. Her husband Senator Mitch McConnell, RKY, only voted present due to the conflict of interest. Before Chao's confirmation, the acting Secretary of Transportation was Michael Huerta. Secretary of Energy. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Rick Perry. On December 13, 2016, Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, was selected to be the Secretary of Energy. During a previous presidential campaign, Perry said he intended to abolish the department. His nomination was approved by a 16-7 vote from the United States Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources on January 31, 2017. On March 2, 2017, Perry was confirmed by the United States Senate in a 62-37 vote. Before Perry's confirmation, the acting Secretary of Energy was Grace Bochenek. Secretary of Education. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Betsy DeVos. Trump's selection of former RNC member Betsy DeVos from Michigan was officially announced on November 23, 2016. Originally scheduled for January 11, but was postponed because the Office of Government Ethics had not completed its review of DeVos' financial holdings and potential conflicts of interest. On January 20, the Office of Government Ethics completed their ethics report on DeVos, 3 days after her hearing with the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions was held. Senate Democrats requested a second hearing for DeVos after the ethics report was released, but Committee Chair Senator Lamar Alexander denied it. DeVos repeatedly said that she would divest from 102 companies within 90 days if confirmed. On February 7, 2017, the full Senate voted 51-50 with Vice President Pence casting the tie-breaking vote to confirm DeVos, with Pence becoming the first vice president to cast the tie-breaking vote for a cabinet nominee since Henry A. Wallace having his confirmation tie broken by Truman. Before DeVos' confirmation, Phil Rosenfeld served as the acting Secretary of Education. Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Veterans Affairs Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. David Shulkin. On January 11, 2017, David Shulkin, the Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs for Health under President Barack Obama, was selected to be the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. He was later confirmed by the Senate by a 100-0 vote. Before Shulkin's confirmation, Robert Snyder served as the acting Secretary of Veterans Affairs. In February 2018, the VA Inspector General issued a report criticizing Shulkin for misusing department funds to pay for his and his wife's personal travel. On March 28, Trump fired him. Failed nomination of Ronnie Jackson. Trump initially said that he would replace Shulkin with Ronnie Jackson, his White House personal physician. Senators expressed skepticism of the nomination due to Jackson's lack of management experience. Current and former employees on the White House medical unit accused Jackson of creating a hostile work environment, excessively drinking on the job, and improperly dispensing medication. Trump defended Jackson as one of the finest people that I have met, but hinted that Jackson might withdraw from being considered for the position. Jackson withdrew his nomination on April 26. Robert Wilkie. The president nominated former Defense Undersecretary and VA Acting Secretary Robert Wilkie on May 18, 2018, to replace Shulkin. Wilkie was confirmed by the Senate on July 23, 2018, with an 86-9 vote. Before the confirmation, Peter O'Rourke served as Acting Secretary of Homeland Security. The nomination of a secretary-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. John Kelly. On December 7, 2016, John F. Kelly, retired four-star Marine General, was selected to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. He was confirmed by the Senate with a vote of 88-11 and sworn in on the evening of January 20. Kelly's term ended on July 28, 2017, following his appointment as White House Chief of Staff. He was succeeded by Elaine Duke as Acting Homeland Security Secretary. Kirstjen Nielsen. On October 11, 2017, multiple sources reported Trump's interest in nominating Kirstjen Nielsen as Secretary of Homeland Security. She had served as Principal Deputy White House Chief of Staff to Chief of Staff John F. Kelly. On December 5, 2017, the Senate confirmed her nomination, by a 62-37 vote. She took office the next day. On April 7, 2019, Nielsen resigned. The resignation took effect on April 11 and was replaced by Kevin McCaley as Acting Secretary. Cabinet-level officials. Cabinet-level officials have positions that are considered to be of cabinet level, but which are not part of the cabinet. Which exact positions are considered part of the presidential cabinet can vary with the president. The CIA and FEMA were cabinet-level agencies under Bill Clinton, but not George W. Bush. The head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, aka the Drug Czar, was a cabinet-level position under both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, but not under Barack Obama. Not to be confused with the head of the DEA, who has remained in the org chart underneath the cabinet position held by the Attorney General. Designation of an agency as being cabinet level requires that Congress enact legislation, although executive orders unilaterally created by the President can be used to create many other types of position inside the executive branch. Members of the cabinet proper, as well as cabinet-level officials, meet with the President in a room adjacent to the Oval Office. White House Chief of Staff. The White House Chief of Staff has traditionally been the highest-ranking employee of the White House. The responsibilities of the Chief of Staff are both managerial and advisory over the President's official business. The Chief of Staff is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of the President. It does not require Senate confirmation. Reince Priebus, 2017. Trump's selection of former RNC Chair Reince Priebus from Wisconsin was officially announced on November 13, 2016. This role does not require Senate confirmation. The appointment of Steve Bannon as chief strategist was announced simultaneously. Although that strategy role is not a cabinet-level position in the statutory sense, in an unusual arrangement, Priebus and Bannon were envisioned by the Trump transition team as being equal partners, and were announced simultaneously. With Priebus accepting a role within the administration, Ronna Romney McDaniel was elected to replace Priebus in his former role as RNC chair. Priebus resigned on July 28, 2017. John Kelly. On July 28, 2017, Trump announced his Secretary for Homeland Security, John Kelly, would serve as his Chief of Staff. On December 8, 2018, Trump announced that Kelly would be leaving as Chief of Staff. Mick Mulvaney, 2019. OMB Director Mick Mulvaney will concurrently serve as acting White House Chief of Staff. United States Trade Representative. The nomination of a director-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the United States Senate Committee on Finance, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Robert Lighthizer. On January 3, 2017, Robert Lighthizer, a former deputy United States Trade Representative under President Ronald Reagan, was selected to be the United States Trade Representative. Due to Lighthizer prior representation of foreign governments with a trade dispute with the United States, he will first need to obtain a special waiver to bypass the Lobbying Disclosure Act. The waiver would need to pass Congress and have the president's signature to assume the position. Congress waived the ban for Charlene Barshevsky, President Clinton's choice for trade representative in 1997. Lighthizer was confirmed as U.S. Trade Representative on May 11, 2017, by a margin of 82-14. Before Lighthizer's confirmation, Maria Pagan, January 20, March 1, 2017, and Stephen Vaughn, March 2, May 15, 2017, served as acting trade representative. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats on January 7, 2017, Dan Coats, former senator of Indiana, was officially selected to be the Director of National Intelligence. On March 15, 2017, Coats was confirmed by the Senate by a vote of 85-12. Before Coats' confirmation, the acting Director of National Intelligence was Mike Dempsey, ambassador to the United Nations. Like all ambassadorships and all official cabinet positions, the nominee for this ambassador to the UN requires confirmation by the Senate. The nomination of an ambassador-designate to the United Nations is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Nikki Haley sworn in by Vice President Mike Pence on January 25, 2017. TRUMP officially announced Governor Nikki Haley from South Carolina as his selection for this role on November 23, 2016. She was confirmed on January 24, 2017, and subsequently resigned as South Carolina governor. Haley supported Marco Rubio in the Republican primaries and caucuses, but later endorsed Trump as the presumptive Republican nominee. Haley's lieutenant governor, Henry McMaster, who was an early supporter of Trump, was also under consideration for a role in the Trump administration, but since he did not accept such a role, he succeeded to the governorship of South Carolina upon Haley's resignation. On October 9, 2018, Haley announced that she was resigning her position as ambassador effective at the end of 2018. Heather Nauert on December 7, 2018, Trump nominated Heather Nauert for UN ambassador. Director of the Office of Management and Budget. The nomination of a director-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee and Budget Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Mick Mulvaney, in his statement to the Senate Budget Committee, Mulvaney admitted that he had failed to pay $15,000 in payroll taxes from 2000 to 2004 for a nanny he had hired to care for his triplets. Mulvaney said he did not pay the taxes because he viewed the woman as a babysitter rather than as a household employee. After filling out a questionnaire from the Trump transition team, he realized the lapse and began the process of paying back taxes and fees. Senate Democrats noted that Republicans had previously insisted that past Democratic nominees' failure to pay taxes for their household employees was disqualifying, including former Health and Human Services nominee Tom Dashley in 2009. Budget Chairman Senator Mike Enzi, R. Wyoming, noted on the Senate floor, according to Senate records from President Jimmy Carter to President Obama, the longest it has ever taken to approve a first budget director for a new president was 1 week. On February 16, 2017, the Senate confirmed Mulvaney, 5149. Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. On February 8, 2017, President Trump outlined the 24 members of the cabinet, with the director of the Central Intelligence Agency being newly included. The nomination of a director-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Mike Pompeo. On November 18, 2016, Mike Pompeo, the representative of Kansas' 4th Congressional District, was officially selected to be the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was confirmed by the United States Senate on January 23, 2017, with a vote of 66-32. Pompeo was opposed by 30 Democratic senators, while the sole Republican vote against him came from Rand Paul. He was sworn in on the same night by Vice President Mike Pence. On March 13, 2018, Pompeo was named as Secretary-Designate of the State Department following the dismissal of Rex Tillerson. Gina Haspel. On March 13, 2018, President Donald Trump announced via Twitter that he would nominate Gina Haspel to be the CIA director. On May 17, Haspel was confirmed by the Senate in a 54-45 vote, officially giving her the post, and making her the first full-time female CIA director. Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. The nomination of an administrator-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the Environment and Public Works Committee, then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Scott Pruitt. On December 7, 2016, Scott Pruitt, Attorney General of Oklahoma, was selected to be the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. In response to the nomination, Pruitt said, "I intend to run this agency in a way that fosters both responsible protection of the environment and freedom for American businesses." During his January 18 confirmation hearing, Pruitt's testimony openly acknowledged climate change. Pruitt declared the EPA has a very important role in regulating carbon dioxide emissions. Pruitt has sued the Environmental Protection Agency as the Attorney General of Oklahoma on more than a dozen occasions. When pressed by Senator Ed Markey on whether he would recuse himself from ongoing lawsuits, Pruitt would not commit to recusing himself from all the cases he had brought. Pruitt deflected questioning from Senator Bernie Sanders, IVT, on the issue of whether human activity is largely responsible for climate change, stating, "I believe the ability to measure, with precision, the degree of human activity's impact on the climate is subject to more debate on whether the climate is changing or whether human activity contributes to it." Pruitt declined to comment on whether California could set its own emission standards and said he would review the policy. Before Pruitt's confirmation, the acting administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency was Catherine McCabe. Amid 15 federal investigations of his conduct ranging from criminal record destruction to corrupt allocation of funds and abuse of power, Pruitt announced he would resign from office on July 6, leaving Andrew R. Wheeler as the acting head of the agency. Administrator of the Small Business Administration. The nomination of an administrator-designate is reviewed during hearings held by the members of the United States Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship and then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Linda McMahon. On December 7, 2016, Linda McMahon, former CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment Incorporated and Senate nominee, was selected to be the head of the Small Business Administration. McMahon was confirmed by a Senate vote of 81-19 on February 14, 2017. Mary Ann Markowitz served as acting administrator before McMahon's confirmation. McMahon earned approval votes from Senators Richard Blumenthal and Chris Murphy from Connecticut. They defeated McMahon in their respective Senate races. Senator Jim Risch, R. Idaho, chairman of the Senate Committee on Small Businesses and Entrepreneurship, said, "Mrs. McMahon made it very clear that she has the experience, understanding, and instincts necessary to bolster America's small business community and advocate for much-needed regulatory reforms." Removal of the chair of the Council of Economic Advisers. On February 8, 2017, President Trump outlined the 24 members of the cabinet, excluding the Council of Economic Advisers chairman position. In addition to the chairman, the council had 2 other members, also appointed by the president, as well as a staff of economists, researchers, and statisticians. Historically, appointees to chair the council have held PhDs in economics, and the role of the group is to provide advice in the form of economic analysis with respect to policy, as distinct from shaping economic policy per se. Trump released a list of his campaign's official economic advisers in August 2016, which simultaneously was anti-establishment and therefore lean on those with governmental experience, yet at the same time aimed to include some members of business and finance. Many of the listed names received media attention as potential appointees to the Council of Economic Advisers, or in other Trump administration roles. Although removed from the cabinet, the chair designate must be reviewed during hearings held by the members of the United States Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs and then presented to the full Senate for a vote. Cabinet of Donald Trump.
ZipUtateUSAcommand.com